Welcome to Season 2 of the Project Hope podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer. As many of you know, I am a cult survivor myself. For anyone interested, you can hear the story of how I got in and how I got out in Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2. The beginning of this year, 2023, actually marks my 11 years of being out, and I am so super grateful for the ways my life has unfolded since. I now work with survivors of coercive control, and I'm going to take a moment here to define this term, as one of my heart's desires is to help society at large better understand coercive control in cases that are not just culty, but across the globe I view coercive control as a social issue. It's at the heart of cases where women and girls are murdered. We find coercive control in one-to-one relationships that are intimate, in gangs, sex trafficking, and cults of all types. I have a master's in the psychology of coercive control, and I'm just beginning a new element of my career as an expert witness for legal cases that involve coercive control. As a certified trauma professional, I work with survivors. I'm especially excited to be offering a group survivor program for cult and religious abuse recovery. So this is not a support group, but rather a healing program. It's based on my certification in the incredible work of Dr. Jilly Jenkinson, who gathered decades of research on survivors to create a body of work that I would consider to be the most comprehensive and flexible approach I've come across in this field. We will meet every other week for 6 months, and registration will open in February of 2023 for those interested. Lastly, I am also a research associate at Salford University and explore topics related to coercive control. So let's jump back into a basic understanding of coercive control before I introduce the next episode. Coercive control is a strategic pattern of behavior designed to exploit, control, create dependency, and dominate. The victim's everyday existence is micromanaged, and their space for action, as well as potential as a human being, is limited and controlled by the abuser. Initially, the victim may be drawn into the relationship with love bombing and charm. Then gaslighting, isolation, economic control, and financial abuse can take place alongside rules and regulations that are gradually introduced over time and change at the whim of the abuser. The victim knows there are consequences if rules are broken, and they apply to the victim rather than the perpetrator, creating a double standard. Over time, coercively controlling behavior erodes the victim's sense of self, their confidence, self-esteem, agency, and autonomy. The abuser creates an unreal world of contradiction, confusion, and fear. It may be helpful to know that 51% of victims do not even know that they are being abused, manipulated, and controlled. Coercive control correlates significantly to serious harm, and in many cases, in intimate partner violence, it precedes homicide. These can be difficult topics to grapple with, so I truly hope that this podcast helps to protect you and those you love with helpful voices and information. If you appreciate the podcast, please let us know by subscribing and comment with kindness. And always think critically, trust your intuition, and be free. Esther Friedman is a licensed mental health counselor, expressive art therapist, songwriter, author, and ex-cult member. In 2006, a new friend introduced her to an esoteric school. In 2011, she left a secret cult. Afterward, she researched obsessively and recognized school as a cult. She posted a blog. Soon, Cult Confessions, a CD of 10 original songs, followed. Every time she spoke or sang out, she felt calmer and clearer. She started an edutainment campaign, presenting her misadventure to private audiences. Releasing secrets freed her voice and mind. The Gentle Soul personality profile and a mission to empower other empaths unfolded. She published The Gentle Soul's Revolution, a memoir, a public service announcement, and recovery guide and template to help gentle souls navigate exploitative relationships. If you feel so moved, please consider helping the Gentle Soul's Revolution move into audiobook format. There is a crowdfunding campaign to get it recorded and available to listen to, so please see show notes for that link. Today, Esther's story and songs are weaving together into a mini musical. So exciting. She has a full-time therapy practice for all survivors of narcissistic abuse. In the show notes, you'll also find all social media links for Esther and the Gentle Soul's Revolution. I do want to mention that amidst the links, you will also find cultconfessions2.com, and this site contains further information about the group and Esther's reflections and writing. I thought I'd take the opportunity to introduce you to a sneak peek post that Esther wrote by the name of Identity Theft Defined. Here's what she shares. Quote, "When it comes to describing cult indoctrination, language falls short. Phrases like brainwashing, thought reform, and mind control focus exclusively on cognitive hijacking, without including body, heart, spirit, and soul. For me, cultic indoctrination is a holistic hijacking. Cults steal personhood. Cults poison the minds, then insidiously seep into heart, body, and soul. This is psychological and social violence. It evicts individual agency and fosters dependency on false savior. Cults peddle false hopes. You lay down your money and a never-ending theft unfolds. The hierarchy weaponizes your trust along with any uncertainty or fear you feel, your hopes and dreams, strengths, weaknesses, attachments, and relationships. Cults betray, and the top-tier narcissist benefits at everyone else's expense. That is the nature of the beast. In the midst of my personal misadventure, I clearly remember being stuck in commuter traffic, crawling toward the job I hated, with the thought, my life is no longer my own, popping into my consciousness. It still took me another 2 years to leave. If you ever find yourself thinking something akin to, my life is no longer mine, the time to take your life back has arrived. I don't recommend waiting another 2 years. End quote. Esther's book, The Gentle Soul's Revolution, is beautifully written, both memoir filled with insightful and personal discoveries that others will likely find helpful, but also very specifically, she addresses these dynamics that we can find so confusing. So the content is educational and healing. It will especially benefit those who might consider themselves a gentle soul. In part 1, we discuss more about who the gentle souls are. But if you relate to the term, you will likely find this book to be a soft basket you can curl into, as it hopefully buoys you along the sometimes rocky river that many of us in recovery can find ourselves in. I hope this book cradles you in from the storm or simply helps you along this tender journey. Welcome to part 1 of our 2-part discussion. I'm so grateful to introduce you all to my colleague and now friend, Esther Friedman. Welcome, Esther Friedman, to the Project Hope podcast. It's such a delight to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me, Jennifer. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Thank you. So let's begin, Esther, if you don't mind just sharing a tiny bit of your history with us, kind of your origin, bio, family, and kind of moving into your life journey toward the cult.
So I grew up in the 70s. I'm a Gen Xer, and I grew up in a secular Jewish family that was very academic, very focused on intellectual things. And I was always, from as far back as I can remember, spacey, artistic, creative, just not conventional thinker, right? And I will say that that's where the gentle soul profile comes from. I had a natural creative bent drive. I was naturally empathic. Like, I can remember as young as 5 or 6 knowing what other people were feeling. And as I write about in the book, that was not welcome, So the unfortunate thing is, though, my family has as much dysfunction as any family, right? But it wasn't insane. It wasn't abusive or anything like that. Yeah. But I grew up feeling like there was something wrong with me all the time.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was such a setup, to stumble into cult later in life. So, do you have any specific questions? I know that's kind of like the general overview.
No, that's great. I was kind of wondering about potential of religious background. So, and interesting also, I love that you really sort of share the timeline with us as you describe going into the group and sort of what was happening for you around that time, kind of this, I'm sure so many will be able to relate to this, that kind of striving for, have I landed in the success of my life yet?
Right. And I clearly had not. I mean, what I like to say is I was not adulting well, So when you stumble into adulthood without any sense of confidence or a foundation of what your strengths and weaknesses are, in fact, in my case, and I would say for many people who fit this profile of the gentle soul, the things that are strengths are pathologized, right? Oh, you're too sensitive. Oh, you think too much. So anything that, you're not creative enough to be famous, so anything that felt like was a natural calling for me, I was told by various messages like, oh, you have to change that. You have to be someone else. So, I was in my early 40s when this happened, when I stumbled in, and it was because, really nothing was working. Like, I had this very inauspicious history of failed relationships. I was in human services, but it paid so poorly and it was so draining that I was like, I just don't know if I can continue doing this. I was trying to change career to writing, but I found that the opportunities were just, again, draining, boring. I couldn't, so I just felt drained by life at that point.
Yeah.
And I think, now that I've kind of created that profile, that I've talked to a lot of gentle souls who are like, yeah, I get that. I stumbled into this world going, I don't know if I belong here. I don't know how to navigate it.
Yeah.
I don't know how do I be myself in this world? And if I can't be myself in this world, how do I become someone else? And when I try to do that, I fail.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Isn't it interesting? I often think about these kind of societal paradigms and just these natural states that some of us have, the gentle soul being one, and how in more tribal communities, these people are the gifts that serve something very particular,
yeah.
and we just, in the changes that we've made also, sometimes there are these souls that do not fit in to society kind of because of how we've morphed it, and what we now value.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it does a lot of damage.
yeah, right. If you are open to it, I have a passage that might be appropriate to read right now. And people will hear in the intro much more kind of about the book, about your bio. But this might also be kind of a nice little introduction in the beginning.
Okay.
This in the book is page 76. And you say, if you are recovering from your own cultic misadventure, educating yourself will empower you. As you learn about these red flags, you will recognize the warning signs and pump the brakes sooner. I suggest going forward, practicing a less is more strategy and taking your time when getting to know people. If you need to walk away and close the door on toxic groups and relationships, do so with minimal explanation. You don't owe anything to those who fit this parasitic profile. Your primary job is to protect yourself. If something feels wrong, trust the feeling. Something's wrong. That's the compass that lives within, and trusting it will save you time, energy, focus, and a lot of emotional and psychic pain. Your compass will point you in the right direction. You will start listening to yourself before external messages. To gentle souls, this feels antithetical, as though you're becoming a person that you don't want to be, selfish and callous. But gentle souls have a skewed perception of what constitutes selfishness. We tend to feel overly responsible for other people's feelings. We over-explain ourselves while extending the benefit of the doubt to others. Pathologically selfish people will weaponize your confession. So, proceed with caution and pump the brakes when uncomfortable. We are wired to extend compassion, understanding, and empathy to others, but rarely do we give ourselves the same consideration.
Yeah.
I love that. So now at least the audience has maybe a little bit more of a flavor of from where you speak, and also something that feels very understanding in terms of the process and the mindset,
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm curious, Esther, so share with us a little bit, if you would, about kind of the group itself. And I'm actually curious, if you don't mind commenting on this. I did realize kind of as the book went on that although there were some different teachings in this group with the Gurdjieff history and some of this, it also sounded like they did go into some biblical stuff and even kind of Jesus stuff. And I'm always so curious when people are raised with different backgrounds and they get into these groups and sort of adopt this whole other paradigm, what that's like for them.
What's so funny, Jennifer, is there were so many Jewish people in this group. And as you know, because you read the book, the big culmination of whatever the hell we were doing happened during Christmas.
Yes.
The big Christmas party. But this group was really more centered around Gurdjieff and ideas. And by the way, I just don't remember if I say this in the book, but they never mentioned Gurdjieff. They just called them ideas, these secret esoteric ideas that have been passed on through the centuries.
Well, and
So,
Esther, I have to say, not to interrupt, but to relate, it kind of cracked me up because, again, in terms of these similarities, my group as well, I don't tend to remember this when I'm stating publicly or describing my group publicly, because there are other defining elements to it that were more than this. But
yeah.
they definitely, the female leader of the two top leaders, she actually had an entire background where she was living in a Gurdjieff community with her family for years.
Really?
So we definitely had those teachings come into our entire belief set and system.
Oh my gosh. And
Isn't
I
it
don't
fascinating?
imagine that she probably didn't mention Gurdjieff either. In the
Right. We did know that the group, the communal living that she had done raising her kids and with her husband,
Yeah.
had been in that community,
Okay.
because it was actually labeled that way. But yes, we never knew when it was those teachings. It was kind of in retrospect when I learned a little more about it, like, oh, this is how it seeped in.
That is really interesting. So there's a parallel between your group and mine in which there's this potpourri of ideas, like some are biblical, some are philosophical. We're just going to same stew and pretend like we own them because
Right.
that's what cults do, you know? So, in my case, and I know I'm interrupting myself, but I always think this is kind of funny. I feel like sometimes these groups take on the character of the region. So, this is Boston based. Like there's a university on every corner, right?
Yeah.
So, and also, there's a weird kind of link to my family background where it's very academic. We're talking about ideas, and these ideas might change the world. It certainly will change you into some kind of a highly evolved, superior being. um, so, whereas your experience was in New York, right?
I actually moved around a little bit. So
Okay.
I actually began in Boston,
Oh, no kidding.
opened a center in New York,
Okay.
and also had a stint in California.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
All right. So the presentation was more of Bible study Christian group, right?
It was a little bit, the bent on it was that it was, of course, a special form of Christianity. It was
As they
the
are.
real, right, the real path, the inner path, which of course is the more elevated one where we're doing personal self transformation through direct communication with God within,
Okay.
and even using the Bible in that way, that it was more symbolic use of the characters in the Bible to contemplate those roles within you. But there were sort of many layers, and there was, we had the Self-Realization Fellowship and Paramahansa Yogananda, some of their rituals and teachings sewn in. Jesus and Mary were equal. So, of course, that was very attractive to me. We're holding the masculine and feminine in perfect equality.
Yeah, got it. Okay. But it does sound like it has more of since the Bible is not taught as literal, it does have more of a kind of intellectual bent to it, right?
Yes, there was
Yeah.
definitely a lot of intellectualization going on for sure, even into New Age explanations of things, cosmos stuff and, as above, so below
Oh,
gets
very familiar.
translated.
Yeah. Yes. I know that one. So I don't know if I'm giving you enough of the character of the group, but it definitely was, very studious, like Boston. There wasn't a whole big bunch of specific talk about God or the Bible, but every once in a while that was sewn in, or we would read Bible verses, you know. But I think the biggest characterization, or the most, I don't know, the seediest part of it was its secrecy, because we really were not allowed, supposedly, to tell anyone about it. Like, we didn't live in the group, right? I would go home to my husband, people would go home to their families or roommates or whatever, but no one around us was supposed to know that we were doing this thing.
That was actually an element as I sort of journeyed through the book that was so striking in terms of how kind of extreme that was, that truly you weren't sharing anything with anyone. And the story about the one gentleman that leaks to something to his partner and then gets, public shaming, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that was really fascinating to me. And also I was really grateful that you shared a lot about the group dynamic, because it's always fascinating. It's like you need the relationships within the group to keep people in to an extent.
Yeah.
And yet all this secrecy, I feel like you described so well how you can feel the connection to others, like in these Christmas party events.
Yeah.
And yet with your getting out, that you realized that you literally only knew people's stories in a very specific context, like literally not knowing anything about their lives,
Yeah, it was so one-dimensional, only through the filter of what was allowed in school, because we really, we weren't supposed to fraternize with each other outside of the group. And I would say, at least in my class, and putting quotes around that, because there were just other iterations of the group that I didn't know about,
Right.
New York, which I like to call corporate headquarters, in the way it was run.
Yeah.
Than Boston, the poor cousin. But I think, at some point it's so sad how my memory does this. I think I talk about this in the book, where we're so isolated from each other that, I have these weird connections with certain people. I don't know why, because we can only talk about the ideas, and everything is orchestrated by the teachers who sit up in front of the class, and now, after leaving, developing a relationship with one friend and realizing, like, we go out to dinner and I'm like, I don't even know this person. Like, she's telling me about her world travels. And I was like, I had no idea you were that adventurous. I always saw her as really careful, very quiet, and she was telling me these crazy stories. And I was like, God, it's so stunning to me to think that we started accepting that as normal.
Yeah. The things we begin to accept as normal, the myriad of things, right?
Yeah.
Really. Yeah. So will you tell us a little bit about kind of the structure of the group? And I was actually curious when you talked about, is her name Sharon? Yeah. When you speak about her, it was also very interesting to me that when you were exposed to her, that there wasn't a lot of fanfare around it, that there wasn't a big thing about who she was and the reverence and all of that.
Well, what's really interesting about that. So let's see. So starting with the structure of the group, maybe I'll kind of walk you through, without getting too granular. I meet somebody in a grocery store, right? She invites me to meet other friends. These other friends happen to get together twice a week. And my first experience, or my class, so to speak, was a very small group of people who, sat around and talked about ideas, quote unquote, after some quote unquote teacher would introduce these ideas, right?
Yeah.
And then you're moved into another class, which is bigger, and there are longer term people. And suddenly the free flowing conversation is no longer free flowing. Like, we I mean, the group was called school, and we literally, I mean, we had to stand up, but it was akin to like raising your hand when you're in grammar school, right? To
Wow.
speak. So the teachers at the front of the class, and there was usually two, a man and a woman, orchestrated whatever that conversation was, right? Some people would get cut off. Some people would yammer on and on and on. Sometimes the conversations were based around what we were learning in the class, some Gurdjieff idea that we didn't know was Gurdjieff's idea, but it was. Sometimes someone was getting up and asking for help. So when you ask for help, as is outlined with Lifton, right? It's a confession. I'm having trouble in my life. It's always a group thing, right? The person, the student is standing up and asking for help. The teacher is imparting wisdom based on these ideas that are Gurdjieff's, but we didn't know that. So there's a younger class, the smaller one, right, for newbies like me, that's a little less rigid. There's an older class that's definitely more rigid. There's like junior teachers.
Okay.
Stainers who are like, they're like AA sponsors. And then there are the teachers. And this is just in Boston. Then there's New York, which has its own structure. But we didn't know about New York, or most of us didn't know New York existed. I didn't know about New York until I left. So that's how secret that was. And then, I think, Jennifer, I don't know this for sure, but I think there are always little recruitment classes going on throughout both of those cities.
Yeah.
I think there's always constantly people out there fishing for recruits.
Yeah. So you guys had a leader that in your book, you call Roger, who was kind of the head of Boston, it sounded like.
Yes.
But then when you leave, you find out that there's actually been this figurehead who, by the way, I always find it fascinating when it's a woman.
Yeah.
That she was part of this sort of origin story of it beginning in California, then being kind of discovered, the name change as is typical, and the move to New York.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do you want me to speak to that a little bit? Like, it might help in giving some context because, so here I am in Boston. I have no idea there's a New York until I leave. Then I learn about this woman, Sharon Gans in New York, who is now dead. She died of COVID, I think in 21. Who's got this whole other, what I like to call corporate headquarters in New York, because really she's the top, okay? But she was married to the person who I think, the L. Ron Hubbard of school, his name was Alex Horn, and he started this group in the late 60s, early 70s.
Oh, right.
In California, which, there are several iterations. It was on a ranch for a while. I don't know what it was at that point, but he fancied himself a playwright. So at some point he opened a theater called the Theater of All Possibilities, which is very funny if you feel like digging into some reviews of the Theater of All Possibilities, you will hear some horrified theater critics going, "Oh my God, that was torture to sit through." So the theater people would aggressively sell these tickets and then try to recruit into the group. And finally, San Francisco, journalists in the city had enough and shut it down. And then they migrate from the West Coast to the East Coast, go to New York, Boston. I don't know, I don't know what happened first. I assume New York happened first and then Boston. And then I heard whispers of Copenhagen. So how Copenhagen happened, I don't really know, but they're kind of viral. And so Sharon, she married Alex. He was really the head honcho, but then when they went to New York at some point, he was allegedly very violent, both sexually and physically. Yeah. I never experienced anything like that. and at some point, the story is they got to New York and the group confronted Alex Horn. Probably he's older, right? He has less
Wow.
power, and Sharon took the throne from him.
Okay.
Yeah.
How
Isn't that
interesting.
interesting? Yeah. They confronted him on his violence, his physical and sexual violence, I guess. But,
Wow.
she apparently she was not physically or sexually violent, but she certainly was abusive verbally and emotionally and spiritually. So,
Yeah. And so is the group actually functioning today in New York and Boston?
so I'm pretty sure yes in New York.
Yeah.
Um, Boston, it's a little unclear and it's so secretive, it's hard to know.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that, 2021, maybe even 2022, people would contact me through the blog and say, "Oh, yeah, they approached me. I'm glad I found the blog." So
Oh.
I don't know how successful it may still be going on, but it's hard to believe that they're growing the ranks.
Wow.
Um, but I don't know for sure.
Wow. And
Yeah.
may I ask, do you know if Roger is still functioning or what
Um,
happened?
the rumor is that Roger got kicked out, that Sharon kicked him out.
Oh.
So last I heard, no, he is no longer the head honcho. And again, it's really hard to know because some people do come in and out of this group, and
Huh.
like he was very young when he stumbled into this and groomed up the ladder, and it's you know I have to wonder how he is functioning without it, if he's functioning without it.
Yeah.
But again, everything's so secretive, it's hard to tell.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and I found it very interesting that they actually took legal action against you.
Yeah.
I mean, it shows also kind of the power dynamic, right? I mean, to do the actual legal threats, I always consider that kind of next level. To me, that's like sort of still with, I mean, maybe the cult next door, the little cult next door is going to do that, but likely not
Yeah.
unless they, have a lawyer who's one of the students or something.
Right.
So that was interesting to me. And do you mind sharing a little bit about that? I know we're kind of jumping a
Yeah.
bit all over, but that might be
I
just a natural area to go right now. I was really curious. I love that you shared with us a little bit about your experience there and kind of what happened for you in that process.
You know what? I actually really, I don't know if this is the right word, enjoy talking about the legal part because I think it's so heinous what these groups do to the judicial system, and really needs to be exposed. And in my case, I can laugh about it now, but when it happened, it was terrifying, and I also felt like, wow, these people really do have these magical powers because the case was so ridiculous. Um, it was, first of all, I live in Massachusetts and I got these legal papers from New York from a plaintiff I'd never met before in my life,
Oh,
who, who was accusing me of withholding information from her for another lawsuit that she was filing because someone had posted a comment on my blog.
huh.
It's a blog. I don't, I've never met most of the people who have commented on that blog.
How interesting. So it wasn't even about what you wrote, it was
Mm.
about someone's response.
It was about someone's response, and not even what the person wrote. They just wanted the person's identity because person had their own blog. And I say person, Jennifer, because I know so little about this poster. I don't know what the gender is,
Yeah.
you know? So
Huh.
I got this. I got this paper and this legal filing from New York. They weren't going after money, but it was the start of like, we are going to intimidate you, you know? And I was lucky because I have a really dear friend who's a lawyer, and I I got together with him and I was like, Mark, do I have a story for you? So this never happens. This never happens that people get pro bono legal help, but I got it from this global firm. And this lawyer, Lisa Gilbreth, God bless her, she snuffed it out in 4 months, but it it was just so. But before that happened, my friend Mark, the lawyer, helped me write a letter to the judge saying, I live in Massachusetts. They had a court date. I was like, this would be a financial hardship for me to travel to New York and hire a lawyer. I don't have the information that you claim I have, and this judge didn't give a shit and wanted me to go to New York for a bullshit court date, right? She, found in their favor, and that's when he got this firm, Denton's, involved. And Denton's is huge. I mean, I could not have gotten more lucky.
Wow.
Because the lawyer for the cult was really freaked out by it. In fact, he at one point said to my lawyer that his clients were out for blood. And I said to Lisa, the lawyer, I was like, is that how lawyers like usually talk to each other? And she was like, well, I think he's intimidated,
Funny.
But yeah, if I had not turned to Mark, if I didn't know him, they could have just, just really sucked all my money out of me. It's just the level of injustice that you can perpetrate through the court system when you've got the money to do so, and a sleazy lawyer who's willing to do it is really, it's so awful.
It is so awful. And as you kind of share in the book, also that it's just a risky, fragile time, and that something like this could so easily just kind of be the last straw that would crumble somebody or send them over the edge or just put them back in insecurity and fear when they're just trying to, reclaim themselves again.
Yeah.
And so I love that you also seem to share that there was actually something about this process that actually kind of became empowering in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, going back to what I said earlier about, I'm not going to keep your secrets, I found my voice through that. And it was also, I mean, I've had this profile of the gentle soul, which I don't know, maybe we should define that a little more for the listeners at some point. Or, I mean, people who are really empathic, people who are very creative, people who are constantly kind of extending the benefit of the doubt. You believe that humanity is good, because for the most part it is, right? But you can never conceive of somebody who would look at another human being and think, what can I get from you? So the fact that you can't conceive of that makes it really hard to navigate people who do that. When you come into that, you don't know what you're looking at.
This is, it's such a beautiful journey with you and the gentle souls through this book, because you really weave your story so beautifully into these principles to break down. So it's like, as we journey through the book, we're also learning about kind of Lifton's work and how these principles function within group dynamics. And yet we have your story to land in. And also you bring it back to, as a gentle soul, how might you work with this? How might you see it? How might you recover as well? So really, through that lens, really, that I feel like this book is such a gift, I'm sure, to the many gentle souls. There's so many that are out there. And I feel like I'm so glad that you called it Gentle Souls Revolution, because I feel like then people will find it also, that there will be an association, that anybody who resonates with this description of the gentle soul, this really is a roadmap that you offer that each one can overlay their own experience onto, but to journey the healing. I mean, it's really beautiful, Esther.
Thank you. And you know what? You just made my day, because that's exactly what I was hoping to offer. This is a roadmap, or it's a template. I want you to take it and personalize it, customize it for yourself, and know that these proclivities of being kind, of being empathetic, of wanting to be helpful in the world, doing anything you can to not hurt. These are like gems in a mean, crass world that you need to protect. And if somebody's telling you that you're too sensitive, then they're probably someone that you don't want to be around very much,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just so curious. I would love to hear kind of from your perspective, and then even if you're able to give us kind of your husband's perspective. Fascinating to me that you were allowed, I use the air quotes, allowed, everybody who's been in a cult will understand, to marry a man who's not a part of the group while you're in it. Yeah. I found that fascinating. So I wonder if you have an idea of kind of where that even, how that was allowed for you.
Well, yes. So let me see if I can explain this succinctly and comprehensively. So this group, you're not, at least in the level that I was in it, you're not living together on a compound or anything like that. Like, people kind of all come together, and the presentation is, we are giving you these ideas, but we're not going to mention Gurdjieff. We're going to pretend like we own them. I think I'll stick that in everywhere that I can. These ideas are experiments in life, So you come here, you get these ideas, and then you go out to the world, and you implement these ideas, and you see how they work for you, and if you're better able to navigate work and relationships and things like this. So, this is part of the reason why I initially wouldn't have stuck the cult label on this group, right? Because people were dating, people were working normal jobs. They had families, and it wasn't like you have to leave all of that behind. It's like, no, we want you to go out and be in the world. But as you ingest these esoteric ideas and become a more highly evolved person, you're going to float out there above the fray,
Wow.
As a superior person.
If I might offer the words from my group, Esther, being in the world, but not of it.
Exactly. Yes. It's funny how the idea is exactly the same. We were remembering ourselves, which is Gurdjieff language.
Yeah.
So the funny thing is, I stumbled into this group, and I hate to say join a cult, because I don't think anyone fucking joins a cult. I hope I can swear.
You can.
Okay. No one joins a cult, right? Like, you meet a friend. I met a friend, You, I think, stumbled into like some kind of an esoteric Bible study kind of a thing.
Right.
Yeah. So I met a friend. She introduced me to other friends. This is in August of 2006. And then in the fall, my now husband, Chris, asked me out. Right. Yeah. And I also got a new job. So here are two things counting my fingers my entire adulthood, a few decades in, and I'm like, hey, I got this job and I kind of like it, and now I have a boyfriend and he's actually a very serious relationship, and not like a dramatic shit show like the other ones. um, and um, so they weren't asserting, all of that's long-winded way to say, they weren't asserting that much control in the beginning. This was a real slow boil. It
Yeah.
wasn't like Jehovah's Witnesses or
Yeah.
Scientology, that you're suddenly, the isolation is really obvious. This is
Yeah.
a real mental isolation. It's like, well, I'm in the world and I'm in this relationship, but I'm kind of superior because I have school. And I was giving school credit for my, success, my sudden success in life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so it's really
Right.
interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So the relationship essentially was kind of tied in to, oh, school, look at all these benefits of school. And then
Exactly.
they could approve it because it was in
Yeah.
connection to them.
Yeah, I can give them credit because I had never had, a relationship that was that clearly serious before. So it's like, oh, must be because of what I'm learning in school, right? Now,
Yeah.
so I wasn't discouraged from seeing him. In fact, when we got married, I remember Roger, um, throwing this surprise champagne toast for me, like the night before, we're about to go off and get married. And of course, he said something like, I remember when you first got here. Like, it was like, oh, you were such a mess. Thank God for me and us. So the control kind of seeps in later. And it seeps in when, of course, we're fighting more, especially during the holiday season when there's this big Christmas shindig, right? Like the
Ah.
Jewish girl is off, like, look at, scamming a Christmas tree,
That was so funny, Esther. Funny, not funny.
But it is, I have to laugh at the absurdity of it. Like, it was so absurd, um, and, 2 years in, 2.5 years in, I was a complete mess. I've gone through several jobs at that point. I couldn't really hold one down because I couldn't think straight,
Yeah.
and my husband is watching this. I've lost like, 20 pounds and
Wow.
I'm just a mess. I can't sleep. He's watching this, so he's complaining. And at that point, that's when school starts to,
Yeah.
um, target him. What's the word I'm looking for? They're turning him into the enemy.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I always find it really fascinating when the getting out or the leaving has to do with a personal connection, right? A spouse or a child.
Yeah,
And that sometimes I love how you framed that also in the understanding there and made it kind of a larger point about the support that we need when we get out,
yeah,
where true community, true friendship that you found in your husband, where he actually cared about you, and that it was the caring to say and to question, like, hey, sweetheart, are you sure that you're not staying because of manipulation?
yeah. So that question was brilliant,
Oh,
right? Imperfectly timed because I was losing my shit, and I had no answer for him. I was like, I don't know why I'm staying. So, it kind of got under what I call the cold coma, and Jennifer, it's true. Like, I mean, I feel it's weird for me to say I was lucky since this happened to me, right? But I also feel like I was lucky because when I left, I I had him
yeah,
and I had a house and I actually didn't have to work. I could just rest and you know, I wasn't in some kind of a desperate situation. I didn't have children to take care of, so many people don't have that, or they are in a much more desperate situation.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and I think all of those things considered, I know some people kind of meander in and out before they actually leave, but for me, I was done. And I think part of that was because I had this safe home with this husband who loved me and also a circle of friends who somehow
stuck with you.
um, yeah. Yeah, they're, despite the crazy cult behavior that they were witnessing. So, I had a real community outside of the group. So many people leave these groups and they have nothing. They have no connections.
Oh, yeah. And may I ask, in retrospect, as you and Chris probably started kind of deconstructing all this, and as you're sharing and using your voice, what were his kind of reflections, and what has he kind of shared about his time with you during that time, or what was actually going through his mind? Did he really think it was as extreme as it was, or was he surprised as you started sharing?
There were a lot of things that were surprising to him, but not that it was a cult.
Yeah.
that was not he was not shocked about that. I think though, the thing is with him is I told him, I broke the rules right away when we started dating, and it's kind of funny. It was like this little weird rebellion that I had even in the beginning, where I was like, well, if he doesn't get to know about school, school doesn't get to know about him.
Yeah.
So I was pretty protective of that relationship. So he knew that twice a week I was going to Thing, which is what we called it, by the way.
Oh, how funny.
I'm going to go to Thing. Okay, see you later, But he didn't know what we were doing. He didn't know what we talked about. He didn't know, what the assignments were. He didn't know about the ideas. Every once in a while, well, during the Christmas season, I would be like, "Yeah, we're doing a work session." But of course, I wasn't supposed to be telling him. I mean, imagine if I had tried to keep all of that secret from him.
We so hope that you enjoyed this episode, and please stay tuned for part of Leaving the Cult, the season 2 song written by Jaya Suri, and for all things related to Jaya, her music, ways that you can support her, check out the show notes.